The rain had already soaked the streets when the little boy ran barefoot across the parking lot, clutching a crumpled prescription paper in his tiny trembling hands. Cars splashed muddy water onto his clothes, but he didn't stop. His chest heaved with panic as he reached the tall man stepping out of a black luxury car beside the glowing pharmacy sign. The boy looked no older than 7. His cheeks were pale from hunger, his lips shaking from fear, and his eyes carried the kind of desperation no child should ever know. He tugged at the stranger's expensive coat with tiny frozen fingers and asked the question that would completely change 2 broken lives forever. "Can you help my mommy stand up? If you believe kindness can still change the world and that one small act can save a life, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts around the world." The man standing beside the car froze. People usually approached him for business deals, investments, or photographs at corporate events. Nobody had ever looked at him the way this child did. The boy wasn't asking for money. He wasn't begging for food. He was asking for hope. And somehow, that made the question hurt even more. The man's name was Daniel Whitmore, the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. His face often appeared in magazines beside headlines praising his billion-dollar success, but nobody ever wrote about the silence waiting for him at home every night. Nobody knew how empty his mansion felt after losing his wife and daughter in a car accident 3 years earlier. Since that day, Daniel had buried himself in work, convincing himself that success was easier than grief. He had stopped visiting friends, stopped celebrating holidays, and stopped believing that his life could ever feel warm again. But now, standing in the cold rain beside a pharmacy, staring into the terrified eyes of a child, something inside him cracked open for the first time in years. The boy pointed toward an old apartment building across the street. His voice trembled as he explained that his mother had fallen again. She had been sick for months and couldn't stand without help anymore. The pharmacy wouldn't give him the medicine because he didn't have enough money. He had tried asking strangers, but everyone ignored him. Some people even yelled at him to move away. Daniel glanced at the prescription paper in the boy's hand. The medication listed there was painfully familiar. His own company manufactured it. He knew exactly how expensive it had become over the years. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel felt ashamed. The boy introduced himself as Eli. He explained between shaky breaths that his mother used to work at a diner until she became too weak to continue. After losing her job, everything slowly disappeared. First the car. Then the furniture. Then the electricity. Eli tried to sound brave while speaking, but his voice kept breaking whenever he mentioned his mother coughing through the night. Daniel noticed that Eli's sneakers were different sizes. One lace was tied together with string. The child looked exhausted beyond his years. Without another word, Daniel walked into the pharmacy with Eli beside him. The employees immediately recognized the famous CEO, straightening nervously as he approached the counter. Daniel quietly paid for every medication on the prescription and then asked the pharmacist to prepare additional supplies for the next 6 months. Eli stared at him in disbelief, holding the small pharmacy bag like it was treasure pulled from heaven itself. But Daniel wasn't prepared for what happened next. The little boy wrapped his tiny arms around him and whispered, "Thank you for helping my mommy." It was such a simple sentence. Yet it hit Daniel harder than every award, every business achievement, and every standing ovation he had ever received. Because for years, nobody had needed him as a human being. Only as a businessman. Daniel followed Eli across the street toward the apartment building. The elevator was broken, forcing them to climb 4 flights of narrow stairs that smelled of mold and damp walls. Eli apologized repeatedly for the mess before unlocking the apartment door. Inside, the room was almost empty. A small mattress rested on the floor near a weak space heater. Dishes sat piled beside the sink. Blankets covered the windows to block the cold air leaking through broken glass. And lying against the wall was Eli's mother, Sarah. She looked far younger than Daniel expected, perhaps in her early 30s, but sickness had stolen the brightness from her face. Her skin was pale, and her body looked frighteningly thin beneath the blankets. When she saw a stranger enter with her son, panic flashed across her exhausted eyes. Eli rushed to her side and proudly showed her the medicine. The relief on Sarah's face was so overwhelming that tears immediately filled her eyes. She tried to sit upright, embarrassed by her condition, apologizing for the apartment and explaining that Eli shouldn't have bothered strangers. Daniel gently told her she had nothing to apologize for. But as he looked around the freezing apartment, he realized how many people had already failed this family long before he arrived. Sarah explained that she suffered from a severe autoimmune disease that attacked her muscles and joints. Some days she could barely walk. Insurance problems and medical debt had forced her to stop treatment months earlier. Since then, her health had rapidly worsened. Daniel listened silently while Eli curled beside his mother, exhausted from fear. Then Sarah quietly admitted something that haunted Daniel long after she said it. She confessed that earlier that morning, she had collapsed while trying to make Eli breakfast. She couldn't get back up for nearly an hour. During that time, Eli sat beside her crying because he thought she was dying. Daniel looked at the little boy sitting on the mattress clutching his mother's hand, and suddenly the memory of his own daughter flooded back so hard that he nearly lost his breath. For years, Daniel had tried not to remember her laughter because it hurt too much. But now, in that tiny apartment filled with pain and survival, the memories returned anyway. And instead of destroying him, they awakened something human inside him again. The next morning, Daniel canceled 3 important meetings and returned to the apartment with groceries, warm blankets, and a doctor from one of the city's best hospitals. Sarah was overwhelmed, insisting she couldn't repay him, but Daniel told her repayment wasn't the point. As the doctor examined her, Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table watching Eli color on scraps of paper with broken crayons. The child smiled more in those few hours than Daniel imagined possible after everything he had endured. That smile stayed in Daniel's mind all night. Over the following weeks, Daniel became a regular part of their lives. He arranged proper treatment for Sarah and transferred her care to specialists who could actually help her recover. He ensured the apartment heating was repaired and stocked their kitchen with food every week. But slowly, something unexpected began happening. Daniel started healing too. For the first time in years, he found himself waking up with purpose instead of emptiness. He looked forward to visiting Eli after work. Sometimes they played board games on the apartment floor while Sarah rested nearby. Other nights Daniel helped Eli with homework while listening to Sarah laugh softly at their terrible spelling mistakes. Those small ordinary moments began stitching together the broken pieces of Daniel's soul. One evening near Christmas, Eli asked Daniel why he never smiled in old photographs online. The question caught him off guard. Daniel hesitated before finally telling the truth. He explained that after losing his family, he forgot how to feel happy. Eli listened carefully before saying something no adult had managed to tell Daniel in 3 years. Maybe your heart was lonely. The simplicity of the child's words shattered every emotional wall Daniel had built around himself. Because the boy was right. His heart had been lonely. Terribly lonely. Meanwhile, Sarah's health slowly improved under proper treatment. Physical therapy helped her regain strength little by little. Some days she could walk without assistance. Other days remained painful, but hope had returned to her eyes. Still, Sarah struggled internally with accepting help. One night after Eli fell asleep, she admitted to Daniel that she often felt ashamed. Ashamed that her son had suffered so much because of her illness. Ashamed that strangers had seen their poverty. Ashamed that she couldn't provide the life Eli deserved. Daniel quietly looked around the modest apartment before answering. He told her that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about continuing to love someone even while carrying unbearable pain. And Sarah had done that every single day. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Snow drifted softly outside the window while the tiny apartment remained silent except for Eli's peaceful breathing nearby. It was the first peaceful night Daniel had experienced in years. But life rarely changes without testing people first. A few weeks later, Daniel's company faced a massive public scandal involving drug pricing investigations. Reporters flooded outside corporate headquarters. News channels attacked him relentlessly. Investors panicked. Social media turned vicious overnight. The board of directors urged Daniel to disappear temporarily from public view until the media storm passed. But something inside him had changed too much. For years, Daniel had hidden behind business language and corporate excuses. Yet after meeting Eli and Sarah, he could no longer ignore the human cost of decisions made in luxury offices far away from struggling families. During a nationally televised interview, Daniel shocked everyone by openly admitting that pharmaceutical companies, including his own, had failed ordinary people. He spoke about families forced to choose between rent and medicine. About children terrified of losing parents because treatment costs were impossible. His own executives were furious. Stocks dropped immediately after the interview. But millions of ordinary people watching at home felt something different. For the first time, a powerful man sounded honest. Daniel announced a major restructuring plan that would reduce costs for life-saving medications. Investors threatened lawsuits. Board members warned him he could lose everything. Yet Daniel didn't care anymore. Because once you've seen a hungry child beg strangers to save his mother, money starts looking very small. The backlash became brutal. Corporate allies abandoned him. News articles questioned his leadership. Former business friends mocked him privately. Some accused him of becoming emotional and weak. But every evening, Daniel returned to the little apartment where Eli greeted him with excitement like he was the most important person in the world. And somehow, that mattered more than public approval ever had. Christmas Eve finally arrived covered in soft falling snow. Daniel visited the apartment carrying gifts, expecting a quiet evening together. Instead, he found the room decorated with handmade paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling. Eli had spent days creating them from old newspapers and notebook pages. Sarah managed to bake small homemade cookies despite her aching hands. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't glamorous. But it felt more like family than anything Daniel had experienced in years. During dinner, Eli suddenly disappeared into the bedroom before returning with a folded piece of paper. He nervously handed it to Daniel. It was a drawing. The picture showed 3 people standing together beneath bright yellow sunlight. One was Eli. One was Sarah. And the third figure was Daniel holding both their hands. At the top, written in messy child handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping my mommy stand up." Daniel stared at the drawing for several seconds before quietly wiping tears from his eyes. No business award had ever made him emotional. But that simple drawing nearly broke him completely. Later that night, while Eli slept beside the Christmas tree they decorated together, Sarah and Daniel sat quietly near the window watching snow cover the city streets. Sarah admitted that before Daniel appeared, she had almost given up hope. Not because she wanted to stop fighting, but because exhaustion had become stronger than hope. Every day felt like survival. Every night felt like fear. Then she looked at Daniel and softly said that he hadn't only saved her health. He had saved their belief that good people still existed. Daniel lowered his eyes because he didn't feel like a hero. If anything, he felt guilty for spending years ignoring suffering while building wealth. But Sarah gently reminded him that sometimes people change because pain finally teaches them how to see others clearly. Those words stayed with Daniel forever. Months passed. Spring slowly replaced winter. Sarah continued recovering beyond what doctors expected possible. Eli began thriving in school again, laughing more freely and sleeping without nightmares. Daniel kept reforming his company despite enormous resistance, creating assistance programs for struggling patients nationwide. The public opinion surrounding him slowly shifted. People began seeing him not as a billionaire executive, but as someone trying to correct mistakes. Still, Daniel never told reporters about Eli or Sarah. Some stories are too sacred for headlines. One afternoon, Daniel attended Eli's school play. Sitting among ordinary parents in uncomfortable folding chairs felt strangely beautiful to him. When Eli spotted Daniel in the audience, his entire face lit up with pride. That expression alone was worth more than every luxury Daniel owned. After the performance, Eli hugged him tightly and asked a question that left Daniel speechless. "Do you think people can become family even if they aren't born together?" Daniel felt emotion rise painfully in his chest. Because deep down, he already knew the answer. The truth was, somewhere between pharmacy visits, hospital appointments, shared dinners, and quiet nights of healing, these broken people had slowly become each other's family. Not through blood, but through love, survival, and kindness. And sometimes, that bond becomes even stronger. Years later, Daniel would still remember the exact moment everything changed. Not during a billion-dollar deal. Not during a speech. Not while standing beside powerful people. But in the rain outside a pharmacy, when a terrified little boy asked a stranger to help his mother stand up. Because one small act of compassion didn't only save Sarah's life. It rescued Daniel from his own loneliness too. And perhaps that's the miracle people often forget. Sometimes the person saving others is secretly waiting to be saved themselves. Before this story ends, leave a comment below and tell us, what was the most emotional moment for you in this journey? As time moved forward, Daniel eventually transformed more than just his company. He opened a foundation dedicated to helping families who couldn't afford critical medicine. Thousands of struggling parents received treatment because one little boy once refused to give up on his mother. Sarah later became a counselor for families dealing with chronic illness, using her own painful experiences to help others survive emotionally. She often told frightened parents that hope can return when you least expect it. And Eli never forgot where they came from. Even as he grew older, he continued visiting pharmacies during holidays with small care packages for struggling families. He understood something many adults never learn: kindness matters most when someone feels invisible. One evening years later, Daniel stood beside Eli at a charity event filled with cameras and applause. Reporters praised Daniel for his humanitarian work and asked what inspired such dramatic changes in his life. Daniel looked toward Eli for a moment before quietly answering that sometimes the most important lessons come from the smallest voices. Then he smiled. A real smile. The kind he thought he had lost forever. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel realized something beautiful. The lonely man who once walked through life carrying only grief no longer existed. Because a child's desperate question had led him back to humanity. And in helping one mother stand again, he had finally learned how to stand emotionally himself. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from today? Your support helps these emotional stories reach people all around the world.